Liz Moody, Ed Newton-Rex, and Matt Adell. And look at that, you guys sat right under your photos. How perfect. Well choreographed.
Yeah.
So I would like to start with some brief introductions on each of us so you have some context on who we are and what we've done. Starting with myself, as Tracy mentioned, I've been here in the Valley for a really long time. In fact, I'm a native. I was fortunate enough to have Steve Jobs as my mentor when I was a teenager, and wound up birthing and running Apple's focus on music and entertainment from its earliest focus in that sector for the lengthy tenure of my time there. More broadly, I've been bridging the worlds of Hollywood and Silicon Valley across all manner of innovations throughout my whole career. And these days, I work as a trusted advisor, working with founders and innovators and leaders cross-sector, helping them to optimize their leadership internally, externally, growing their companies, growth strategies, and driving business development as a so-called super connector to help them accelerate where they say they want to go with their growth. And seen a lot of things in the music tech space from pretty much day one of when it existed, and helped usher in a lot of it. To my immediate left is Matt Adell, who is the COO of Musical.AI. And each of you, I'd like you to just take a minute, since we have the luxury of a few less panelists, to talk about your background in the space and what you're doing at a high level with your company, and then we'll dive into some more specific questions. So Matt, let's start with you.
I started working in a record store when I was 13 years old, and I've been selling music ever since. Started working for Motorola very, very early in the streaming era, building early internet streaming services for the likes of U2 and David Bowie and the Smashing Pumpkins over 25 years ago. Since then, I've been the vice president of music and product at Napster. I like to tell people when it was legal, when we were paying people. I'm also the former CEO of Beatport, who sold it to Bob Sillerman. I sold a company called Metapop to Native Instruments after that. And I'm working on the most exciting problem and challenge I've ever seen in my career to the music business, the entertainment business, and frankly, copyrights in general. We've built a platform that allows rights holders to license their content for training, but keep control of their content. Today, if the New York Times licenses stuff to AI company ABC, it's not really a license. It's a permanent grant of the value of their IP, because there's no way for the licensor to take their content back. There's no way for that licensor to understand how their material is being used and monetized. And in today's systems, there's no attribution that tells you which training objects created the item that you just output. Well, we've invented attribution for AI and an infrastructure that supports this for rights holders and AI companies.
Fabulous. And Ed Newton-Rex. Ed has been around, well, from the earliest days of AI for music. We worked on competitive, cooperative ventures in the earliest days of AI for music about a decade ago, when you were running JukeDeck. So why don't we start there and tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, I founded an AI music company called JukeDeck in 2010. We didn't call it generative AI back then. I don't know what we called it. Everyone thought it was absolutely crazy, and for a long time it was. And I ran that for 8.5 years. We sold it to ByteDance in 2019, and so I went to work at TikTok, and did a bunch of AI there, and then worked at Snapchat for a bit, and then I ended up a year and a half ago working at Stability.AI, where I ran the and they're the makers of Stable Diffusion, where I ran the audio AI team. And we released a product called Stable Audio last September, which was a music generation product that was trained only on licensed data. That was really like the big thing that we wanted to try to do, show you can train state-of-the-art models on licensed data without scraping. But then a couple of months later, I quit Stability because that kind of mindset didn't kind of permeate to the rest of the company, or really to the rest of the generative AI industry. There's lots of scraping going on. There's not enough licensing. And so then in January, I started what I'm doing at the moment, which is a nonprofit called Fairly Trained. It's pretty simple. We certify generative AI companies for not training on copyrighted work without permission. We've got 15 or 16 AI companies certified including Musical.AI and including Boomy, which is great. Yeah, that's what I'm doing now.
And then Liz, last but not least.
Hi, I'm Liz Moody. I've been working at the intersection of music and tech since right after Napster, I think.
Original Napster.
The original Napster,
which was also one of my
I kind of went from suing Napster to deciding I wanted to help tech companies innovate. So I helped Spotify and YouTube get licensed, came out to the Bay Area in 2010, and I worked at YouTube running music and made my way to Pandora and ran licensing there. And these days I'm helping mostly tech startups, some bigger companies with their strategy and licensing of music. It certainly involves a lot of AI the past few years. I work very closely with Boomy. I'm their in-house lawyer and strategist, and BD will talk a little bit more about what Boomy is doing, but Boomy's been around for 6 or 7 years and is very adamant about ensuring that all of the training data is licensed and fairly obtained, and really is democratizing the creation of music, which I'm pretty excited about.
Liz, that was going to be my next question, was to talk about Boomy's place in the ecosystem. So could you expand on it a little bit?
Sure. Boomy has been around for a little while. It's coming to light in the recent, maybe the past year and a half, where there have been a lot of competitors launching using data sets that maybe were not fairly trained. But what I'm excited, Boomy's got a slightly different model than some of the others, in the sense that as a user, I can go and create music using a licensed and fairly trained data set, really play around, create something that is mine. And if I want to monetize it and distribute it on Spotify or Apple Music, I can do that. We're working closely with famous and well-known artists and producers now to help them use the tool to create and release music. We're also working now with some producers to train specific models specifically on their own music that they can then make available to their fans to collaborate and create music off of their own previously released music. So it's kind of exciting. It's a nice way for artists and producers to grow their fan base and become much closer to their fans. And I think working in the music industry in the past couple of years, one of the challenges has been, you hear artists saying that they don't feel this connection with their fans. You hear the fans saying they don't feel like a connection with the artist, and you see the younger generation really wanting to lean in and create. That's happening certainly on TikTok. It's happening across all digital platforms. So it's fun to see how the fans can actually use the music and create music that was trained on their artist materials.
Yeah, in fact, in that context, fans are becoming part of the creator economy themselves. In terms of reaching whatever size audience they need to reach, they could even make a living or subsidize their living through creating content with some of these tools. That's pretty exciting. Now, the next thing I'd love to talk about is the fact that we've had a couple of big funding rounds in this sector just in the last couple of months. Suno has raised $125 million in B round financing just last month, and in April, Udio raised $10 million in seed funding. And I want us to touch a little bit, for the audience who may not understand what these companies are all about, on the distinctions in terms of what they enable for creators and implications in terms of investors jumping on board relative to growth of the space. And Ed, I want to start with you because you've done some beautiful in-depth op-eds on both of these companies in the past couple months.
Yeah, well, I mean, both of these companies got sued by the 3 biggest record labels in the world yesterday for potentially,
not surprisingly,
hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, because they're being accused of training on the major record labels' music without consent. And I don't know if you've read the lawsuits or seen the lawsuits. They're kind of interesting. There's basically they just present a bunch of evidence that these companies have trained on their recorded music, and then they point out that that's copyright infringement. The evidence comes in like two kinds, I think, right? It's like there's a bunch of evidence from what the people who work at the companies and their investors have said, where they've, like one of Suno's investors said, yeah, if we had the licenses when I got involved, then I wouldn't have invested or something, and like things like that. And then there's a bunch of other evidence where there are a bunch of generated outputs from the system that like closely resemble these labels' recordings. Yeah, and so honestly, the work I've done on these companies tends to focus on that. I wrote a couple of articles in Music Business publication a couple of months ago, that kind of sort of showed this same thing, kind of showed that actually you could generate outputs using these systems, both Suno and Udio, that closely resembles copyrighted music. And I was kind of asking the question, hey, so have they like licensed that data or what? And at the time, there was no information on whether maybe they'd done licenses with those record labels. But I guess the lawsuit yesterday kind of pretty definitively shows that they haven't. So yeah, I think this is like the biggest question in AI music right now. Like you've got, as I say, fairly trained, we've certified of our kind of 16 or so certified companies, maybe 12 or 13 are like music generation companies. So there's really like a lot of music generation companies out there that are licensing their training data, that respect creators, that respect rights holders. And that, it's clearly possible. And I know I've built, 2 of these systems now, one at Juke Deck, one at Stable Audio. Stable Audio, we licensed 800,000 songs, built what was, I think, at the time, like a state-of-the-art music generation model. And it was all licensed. So it's definitely possible. And so then you've also got companies where, who are getting sued by basically the music industry for apparently not doing that. And I think that divide, that divide is kind of why Fairly Trained exists, like to show there's a divide there. Yeah, so that's kind of what I've been working on in that.
Yeah, we're gonna dig into this whole label lawsuit thing a little bit further.
Oh, sorry, I answered the wrong question.
No. You're fine. I just wanted to preface that by saying we got a couple more things to go into. Now, Matt, with regard to the legal and ethical concerns with AI and music, this of course is part of why We Are Musical.AI exists. And in fact, I don't know if you guys are aware, but just this past week, the Anti-Defamation League suggested that Suno is being used to make racist and anti-Semitic music. So there are ethical considerations beyond the legal ones. What say you, Matt?
Well, the internet is a giant hate-producing machine. So any meme generator, any content generator is going to generate terrible shit because people are terrible. But I don't really see that as Suno's fault, although I would imagine systems like this at some point will put some sort of filter on the language.
They have since done that. They have tried to
models.
do that this last week. Yeah.
Sadly, people will just manually make skinhead music if they have to.
Yeah.
And ethics is an interesting question, and ethics is something people can debate. I believe in the value of copyright. I actually think it's fundamental to our economy in this country. I think to throw it away with the bathwater would be an economic suicide for both our culture and our industries. Certainly, I live in Los Angeles. Certainly, my whole city would collapse. And so we believe that the future is going to value the creative output of human beings. And if you value the creative output of human beings, you have to credit them and compensate them for playing a significant role in creating the value of these AI tech companies. And you need attribution to do that.
Well, whenever we have a new innovation, we have disruption, people lose jobs, new jobs are created, especially in the creative world. People freak out at first because they are going to lose, many jobs will be lost, but they don't tend to have the long view about the fact that incremental work is being created, new opportunities. So we have, for example, one of my colleagues, Ashton Kutcher, just commented on Sora, which is OpenAI's generative video solution that just came out a few months ago about the future of filmmaking. And I do want to represent what he shared here. He basically said you'll be able to render a whole movie. You just come up with an idea for a movie, and then Sora will write the script. You'll input the script into the video generator, and it will generate the movie. And effectively, why should you go out and shoot an establishing shot of a house and a TV show when you could just create the same one for $100 to go out and shoot. It would cost you thousands of dollars. So this is the example of where we see the technology starting to disrupt the production cycle. But it's normal and natural. I say it's just part of the process of innovation. What do you guys have to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, I can start. I mean, I agree. I mean, you know, technological disruption is of course normal and natural. In many instances, it's a very good thing. You know, but not if it's based on exploitation. You know, and you know, so I think yes, AI is absolutely coming. It's already here in many respects, and it's going to change dramatically the way many people create content. Yes, but that, you know, that cannot be allowed to happen in a way that you know, takes clearly unethical advantage, you know, probably legal advantage of creators and of copyrighted work, right? And that's the difference. And I think lots of people, when they're kind of talking about, you know, when they're talking about kind of people being worried about losing their jobs and this sort of thing, and maybe what Ashton Kutcher said and what other people have said as well, they tend to kind of focus on the, you know, they tend to kind of brand people Luddites and say, well, you're just scared about the future. You just don't want this change to happen. Change is inevitable. Change is inevitable, but we have to make sure that it's done in a legal and ethical way, and that I think is absolutely critical. So yeah, I think that's the most, and that's often missed when people like Ashton like talk about this. I think it's often missed that the you know, like Sora, what's Sora trained on? You know, like just Sora, which will, you know, presumably systems like it, which will replace a bunch of demand for video creators, will probably replace a bunch of the demand for the training data itself. Like what's it trained on? Yeah. You know, so again, you just have to, like, you start from a point of licensing, you license your training data, and then absolutely technological innovation happens and should continue to happen. Mm-hmm. AI can be an extremely powerful thing, and it should be part of the creative process, but only if ethically done, only if done right. And that's why things like these lawsuits are so incredibly important.
Well, yes, but I've been around long enough to remember when I did some work briefly to help Silicon Graphics launch their focus on entertainment, you know, maybe, I don't know, 30 years ago. They needed the horsepower to do of SGI machines to be able to create dinosaurs for Jurassic Park and the Titanic movie. There would not have been a way to do that without the technology, and it did displace a lot of people. But inevitably, the technology created more effective, efficient visual effects than otherwise could have been created without, you know, costing 10 times the amount it did in production. So I feel like.
But it didn't steal people's work. It didn't steal their work to do that.
Not to diminish that point. I'm just saying that I think that Hollywood in general resists technology at their peril. And I published an in-depth article about this last year. Every time a new technology comes up, it will displace jobs. And that is the nature of innovation. And I just feel like, you know, they always resist it, and it's always to their peril in the rearview mirror.
My colleagues at my firm in LA, many of them work in the movie industry and in the more traditional part of the music industry, and they're terrified. And you know, I tell them, look, when the camera was invented, people thought that wasn't art. Mm-hmm. A photograph wasn't art. I think I agree with everything that Ed said, but I'm also very excited about the innovation that AI is bringing to the creative world. I think it can be an amazing tool for creators to make their own new works. It kind of reminds me a bit, Matt and I were talking about this earlier, it reminds me a bit of, you know, the early mid 2000s when I went over to YouTube and everybody in the music industry thought, there's no way this is ever going to be legal. How are we going to figure out who owns what? How are we ever going to get money from this? And YouTube built out a content ID system with attribution and they're still working on it, but they figured out how to pay out the record labels, the movie industry, and they're paying out, you know, millions and billions of dollars. And I'm actually kind of encouraged by the attribution models that I see. I hear a lot of folks saying to me, well, humans are inspired by what came before them. Every musician is inspired by music that was heard before them. So why should it matter? It's no different if it's a machine. But on the flip side, isn't it kind of cool if these attribution technologies can figure out that, oh, I was inspired by, you know, various different blues and jazz and classic rock in the creation of this new work. And I'm going to be able to now go and compensate those original artists that inspired me.
Yeah.
We could be creating a whole new ecosystem to reward all the artists that came before.
And to monetize those works.
And to monetize it.
Right, in an incremental revenue way.
And attribution is absolutely possible.
Yeah.
I mean, Matt can talk more about that, but I'm really excited to see that. I'm excited to see how this can be done the right way.
Yeah. And again, I think most of us, if not all of us, agree that, I think Jason said this on the last discussion, AI is a tool to augment the creative process. It doesn't need to replace it entirely, and probably shouldn't. There still needs to be the human aspect that engages with it to create the most and best outcomes I can imagine. Do you agree with that from a storytelling standpoint?
I don't think it has to do. I mean, I agree that it should, but I think, and if you've worked on these models, the same model that assists creativity replaces creativity. Like this, the model that can create a sample to use in your music can also create an entire track.
I know it's possible technically. Yeah. What I'm saying is, in a utopian view, wouldn't it be great if we had both working together? Yeah, I mean, 100%.
Yeah. I think ultimately it shouldn't be used to replace, ideally, but I think it often is. Right, that's already demonstrable.
Yeah.
Which is a shame.
Yeah, indeed. Back to the issue about infringement damages, we are going to see them at a scale we've never seen before with the copyrighted content that's not deemed fair use. So we're talking, what did you say, Matt, trillions of dollars?
Yeah, Ed, you said millions, possibly billions. It's $150,000 statutory penalty for willful copyright infringement per song.
And this may even put some of the big tech AI companies out of business, theoretically. Right?
So what's 1 million times 150,000? I'm sure you're all smarter than me, but it's trillion, maybe more? 150 billion? Okay, so it's 150 billion minimum, and my guess is they trained on 10 million major label tracks, not 1 million.
So what's going to be the answer to that?
Some math on those complaints, and it was over $1 trillion in damages.
Yeah.
So Liz,
it's an exciting time.
Liz, you're the lawyer. So what's going to be what do you imagine could be the solution that's going to allow these companies to keep going? And we talked about this before. I know what the answer is, but I want you to
tell me. It's a good question, because everyone says, oh, they'll just settle and pay a couple $100 million and move on. I think the actual details are going to be a lot more challenging, because as I'm involved in licensing conversations with companies that want to do the right thing and train on licensed music, we find there are some artists in the music industry, for example, that don't want their music trained on. Mm-hmm. And if you haven't done it yet, it's relatively easy to carve those catalogs out and not train on them in the future. If you've already done it, it's very hard not to. And this era we're in right now is a little bit different than the Napster or the YouTube era, in the sense that the labels and the publishers, the rights holders, may not actually have the rights from the artist to grant these licenses. They have to go and get them. And if an artist doesn't give it to the label, they won't be able to settle for the entire training data set. So it's going to get a little bit complicated, because I don't know that Sudo and Udio can remove, Bob Dylan's
But do you imagine that it could be as simple as putting one of them out of business and partnering with the other? Suno and Udio? It
could be. I mean, that I do think they'll settle to some extent. I think that's what they're expecting to happen too.
Mm-hmm. Matt, you wanted to add
It's not going to happen tomorrow.
No, it's just started. The battle's just begun.
Attribution can also be a solution to content blocking. So we've built a system where even if a model trained on Bob Dylan, but Bob Dylan didn't consent, our attribution engine can prevent that object from influencing new outputs from the time notification is given. So these are all problems we need to solve for the music business, because this is how the music business is used to doing business. The lawsuits, though, are interesting as well, because this is only part of the lawsuits coming their way. Music is unique in that an individual song has multiple copyright owners, whereas a TV show, it's just owned by the studio or the distributor. So you go to one company and license a TV show. You want to license a song, you need permission from the people who own the recording, which is usually a record label, and you need permission from the people who own the publishing, the composition of the song, which if you're trying to get a Beyonce song, that could be 20 different publishers. So now there's 21 copyrights involved in one Beyonce song. So music is more complicated than other IP. And as a result, the publishers haven't even sued.
NMPA has not come to the table yet, but you know they will.
And they're next. And it's going to be the same amount of money.
David Israelite just posted publicly that he was fully supporting the lawsuit. So you can expect that the National Music Publishers Association is quickly to follow. Yeah.
David Israelite is the gentleman who runs the National Music Publishers Association. Yep. And he always comes to the table with a lawsuit behind the labels. And this will be no exception. Now, we did touch on deep fakes, or I should say Jason did in the last discussion. And of course, this is an issue. Scarlett Johansson most famously called for legislation last month to outlaw AI deepfakes after OpenAI released a voice chat demo that sounded a lot like her. Now, the truth is OpenAI approached her to use her voice and they were willing to pay for it. She said no, and they did it anyway. So where are we going with deepfakes and how is that going to be addressed with AI?
I'm real quick because I'm hoping that there is legislation that protects name and likeness of every American citizen.
Right now, there's no federal law that protects name and likeness rights. They're all state laws. They're different in every state. There are some states where there's more protection than others, but it's really 50 different laws and different rules in every country around the world. So it's complicated. But I think that there's a lot more alignment around that issue than perhaps on the audio only side. It's even not clear if voice is included in name and likeness rights, and at least not in the law today in many places. But I didn't even think I knew that change.
I didn't realize voice wasn't protected in NIL.
It's just not clear in all the laws.
Yeah. There's a really interesting Ford lawsuit from the 80s where they tried to hire a famous singer from the Rose, I forget her name, Bette Midler, to sing a car ad, and she said no. So they hired an impersonator.
A sound-alike,
A sound-alike, and she sued and won.
Yeah.
Or they settled.
Yeah. This happens all the time. Go ahead, Ed.
I think one of the interesting things about the Scarlett Johansson case, because they've come out and kind of said, hey, we didn't intentionally make it her voice, which is, by the way, really good. Like I love it when the AI companies actually come out and say, hey, we didn't do this thing. Usually they just prevaricate and you kind of got to assume they did. But here they said, like, we didn't intentionally do this, and that's a pretty strong statement, right? So that's a good thing. But I mean, at the same time, I think one of the interesting questions that comes out of that is like, okay, well, you didn't intentionally make it Scarlett Johansson's voice, you say, but was Scarlett Johansson's voice in the base model here? Like, was it in the training set? Like, what have you trained this voice model on? Judging by OpenAI's practices that they've gone on record defending that kind of scraping and using material is fair use. Is Scarlett Johansson's voice somewhere in that data set? Maybe. I'd love to know. And I think what you got to remember is like the very ability of the model to like accurately recreate a voice very quickly, usually based on a very small amount of fine-tuned data, is because of all this data that the base model is trained on, right? So like I do think that people kind of are too easy to say, okay, well, you didn't do it intentionally. That's fine. You got to remember that there is at least a decent chance until we see otherwise that her voice was in the data set, and I do wonder whether that like influenced the decisions that OpenAI made about kind of taking the voice down, that sort of thing, right? Because is the voice there? Like the voice might be there. At no point. You should check out what their statement said. At no point did they say we have not trained on Scarlett Johansson's voice. They never said that. They said we didn't intentionally recreate it, and that's a very different thing.
Well, and there are public record letters that show that they made an offer to her to use her voice and pay for it, and she said no. So it's a matter of public. But anyway, we don't have to dwell on that. I think there's a lot of moving parts in this space, and it's changing so fast every single day. As we were preparing for this panel, there was some new news that came out. I mean, it's just accelerating like nobody's business. So in that context, as we wind down this discussion today, what predictions would you guys have? We've all been around the block in tech for so long in terms of where AI goes next with music and creativity over the next couple of years, given the pace it's moving and all the challenges we've discussed.
Well, I'm optimistic. I'm sure I didn't sound that way for the last 45 minutes, but I think there's an incredible opportunity to allow people who've never been able to make music feel that they have created something, which is a very powerful feeling to have. And it's also going to continue to reduce the cost of professional music making, which is great for professional music makers. I don't like to say creators. And so I believe this is a hundreds of billions of dollar opportunity. Everywhere there's music, and there is music more present in your life than you can imagine. Just go to the grocery store and think about how many songs you hear while you're at the grocery store. Huge opportunity for grocery store music to be AI driven to get you to buy the more expensive thing at iSight.
Right.
Everywhere there's music is going to be impacted by this. Musicians will continue to be valuable. People have relationships with musicians and what they communicate through their songs, and that's not going to change.
And the storytelling, yeah.
One of the things that we haven't talked about so much is there's a large legal debate right now about whether the output of these models is copyrightable. And there's an ongoing discussion in the US Copyright Office about it. And I predict that to date, they've basically said if it's coming from a machine, it's not copyrightable. But I've seen even the rights holders over the past 18 months change their view. In fact, 18 months ago thought they're taking the position that it shouldn't be copyrightable, but then once a producer or an artist wants to use this as a tool, they're going to want to own the output. And all the rights holders have pretty much changed their view on that. And I predict that the Copyright Office will make some changes in their view, which is going to place more value on the creations coming out of these models and allow for a lot more opportunity for true artists and creators today, as well as new creators, to actually really monetize and make money from what comes out. And it also will allow the original rights holders today to be able to enforce their rights better, because the challenge now is everything coming out of the output, if it's not copyrightable, it's much harder to actually enforce the works that are copyrighted.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember in 2015, I think it was, we'd recently released our AI music generation website, and it was mostly to generate music to go be used in videos as backing music. But we started corresponding with this one like power user who absolutely loved it, and what she was doing was she was using it to make backing tracks, and then she was writing melodies and singing them over the top. And we got all these messages from her being like, look, I've never been able to make music before, and I can now make music. And she was really contributing. She wasn't just pressing a button. She wasn't just prompt engineering, right? She was like writing and recording a vocal. This was like real musical contribution. And she was like thrilled with this fact. She was gaining followers and like really happy. And so I do think that there are like really positive use cases for generative AI in music creation. I'm excited to see them. I'm excited to see them come to fruition. My prediction though for the future is that like it will be like these models will be based on licensing. I think there is no question of that. They have to be. Without that, the copyright system is essentially destroyed. I think they already are under the law, and I think we'll see that. So we'll see more, for want of a better phrase, like fairly trained models springing up. And I think these are the ones that will ultimately succeed, like the ones that are, giving compensation credit, ultimately control, like to the people who wrote and who own that music.
Yeah, and in my observation, it's just another innovation. It's a big one, but it's all about growth, revenue growth, growth of the market, growth of creativity. So I personally am very bullish about it. Please help me in thanking my panel. I hope you guys have enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you, Kelly.